All right. Where's Andrew Kern? Here. Please come on up. We are now going to begin our Q&A panel. I just want to introduce our speakers. You know them, you love them. Dr. Christopher Perrin, Nina Harris, Andrea Lipinski, Russell Kirk Bidea Prize winner Greg Wilbur, and Andrew Kern.
Thank you. So I'm the moderator, so I'll stand up and probably even just go behind the podium if I'm able to move it. But I want to start with introductions. And so does each of you have a mic? All right. Let's start with Nina. I have a question for you I'd like you to introduce yourself with, which is your name, your role within the classical renewal, and then one thing that you appreciate about Greg Wilbur.
I said he was me.
Yeah. So I'm Nina. My role within the classical renewal started, I guess, not knowingly, as a tutor in a classical program. And then I started the apprenticeship, and that's where my journey truly started, I would say. I didn't know what I was doing up until that point, and I still don't, in many ways. But I teach my kids classically now, and I've been director at junior or 11th grade, 12th grade, and then this past year, 10th grade levels, in addition to my own kids. One thing I appreciate about Greg Wilbur, your love and your passion for music. My kids are all musicians of some sort, and to be able to connect with them on that level and to get that inspiration here when you speak and then through your work has been a blessing.
Thank you. I want to add that Nina serves on the CiRCE Board of Directors, and we appreciate that very much. So, Nina, thank you. Christopher, name, rank, serial number, and something you appreciate about Greg.
Okay. I'm Christopher Perrin. I work with Classical Academic Press. Been in part of the renewal for about 25 years now. Started in 1997 when I unexpectedly found myself the founding headmaster of a local classical Christian school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's how it all started for me. Something I really appreciate about Greg, I mentioned this last night, is generosity. You can kind of sense it in him. He wants to help people. And if you ever ask him for something, he won't forget and he will give you something. So if you want something, go ask him.
Good. Thank you, Christopher. And Andrea.
My name is Andrea Lipinski, and I've been a part of the classical education renewal since I needed to figure out what education was for my own children. And my oldest is 21. I find it a great joy to be able to teach teachers. So I'm now actively involved after graduating from the apprenticeship for the sole purpose of teaching my 2 children. I get to be a part of it and teach teachers as well now. I appreciate Greg Wilbur because he just did what Chris said. I walk up, I touch a book, and it's like, I think I might need this. Can I buy this? He said, you can keep it. You can take it home. He just sent me home with it. So, but it's much more than that. I like watching how you interact with your wife and your daughter. The love is apparent. Thank you.
Well, that means we're on to Greg now. And I mean, we're on Greg. He's next. And Greg, what's your name? What's your role in the classical renewal? And tell us 3 things that you particularly love about Sophie.
My name is Greg Wilbur. I like the aspect of the question, the role, because I feel like my role in the classical renewal has been to, in faith, step through the next door that is in front of me. And that has been at one point in time reading lots of books that I hadn't read before. And at one point in time in 95, it was accepting a role teaching at a small startup classical school. And about 10 years later, it was starting a homeschool co-op. And a few years after that, it was starting a college, which was never the game plan, never the sketch, never the ambition, but it was just what the Lord opened up step by step, and just being faithful and doing that, trying to be faithful in doing that bit by bit. One of the things I think, for three things about my lovely wife. She's there, great. And one of the things I said last night is just her unfailing support and encouragement in so many ways, through all the craziness, through all the plans, through all the misplans, and just the ongoing the sense of we're in this together, and we're a team in this. As part of that too would be number two, the fact that we do this together. That it's children in our home, it's students in our home. It's the opportunity to not just me do these things, but her be a part of that. Her generosity of spirit, her hospitality, and one of the things that just continues to amaze me too is her beautiful way to say just the correct, apt word at the right time in the encouragement of others. She does that very beautifully.
That's wonderful. Let's hear it for Sophie. Well, I'll start you all off with a nice, easy, practical question. I want to start a classical Christian school. Where on earth do I begin? My response is that would be a really good place to start. Any one of you want to go first?
Say the apprenticeship through CiRCE. And there's a new one, right? With Matt?
Oh, no.
Is that
No.
It's not an apprenticeship. Okay.
Don't give away any secrets that aren't true.
Okay. Oh, I remember now. Okay. Sorry.
That's the way
I
it
get
is.
so many emails from CiRCE. Never mind.
How many of you feel like
So-
you're overflowing with thoughts and ideas that you really can't take in another?
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, okay, you and I are in the same place. You have to digest. So our brains aren't working as well at the end of the conference as they are at the beginning.
Yes.
I would share with, keep going.
No, that the apprenticeship. That's where you learn the foundation for how to do this. It's a good tool.
When you ask where to start, what first thought comes to my mind is don't do it alone. You need to do this with a team of people. And it takes a team and it takes time. Building community schools, churches is something that is a long ordeal of time and relationship and slow building of community. Learn from those who've gone before you. Don't be the typical American who's excited to achieve and then just starts working without consulting all those who've already been doing it for 20 years or more. Go visit other schools. Find a sister school that can be your kind of adoptive church school planting partner, and be in regular contact with another school that is the kind of school you want to be, and just ask them to tell you what to do and avoid all of their mistakes. You'll come up with your own ideas. You'll become your own school, but you can do a lot worse than to emulate something that's already strong and good.
I would say to start on your knees. It's I've heard Andrew share that it's often a spot where you'll lose friends along the way because you don't start it alone, but it's quite challenging. And so to add to what you've just shared, I feel like it's a shameless plug, but we offer consulting in that. And so Andrew's one of our lead consultants for schools who are starting. Buck Holler is another. And then we have others who are actively doing it and in their schools that we connect you to provide that.
no matter what you do, you're never going to know everything you need to know, and you're not smart enough to know all the things that you need to know. And so don't wait for that. And don't feel paralyzed by that. Despise not the day of small beginnings. And to echo what I said last night too, think about fruitfulness as opposed to productivity. Not everything has to be perfect. There's grace, and there's this opportunity to walk in that and walk through that and do that in community together.
Wonderful. The next question is along that line in a sort of way. Greg said something along the lines of don't try to be perfect. So the next question is perfect. What are the physical attributes of your ideal school?
To ask the question of ideal, in this moment when we're kind of just trying to rebuild, it's good to have the ideal in mind, but it's also appropriate to remember that you can make anything beautiful even with a small budget. That the beauty of your school is not just a matter of finances and fundings. Think about those of you who are married. Remember when you first started out and you got your first little apartment? Some of you were able to make that beautiful and welcoming and lovely and cultivating. And that's good. That's what you want.
So beautiful, welcome, loving, and cultivating. That's your ideal. I like that.
That's right, no matter what the budget. But that means you need to think creatively and well. And so looking at the ideal of beautiful schools, schools should be more like homes, if you want to use a metaphor, more like homes than the institutions that come to mind when we think about schools. They should be welcoming, there should be refreshments, there should be, the rooms should be decorated such that they're welcoming and conducive to learning and conversation, study and contemplation, like a beautiful home. So I think you could do a lot worse than just to make your school as much like a welcoming home as possible, and start with the budget that you can. And then if you really want to start thinking ideal, I would look to some of the school, you want to have a school of 500 people on a beautiful campus of 30 or 40 acres, if that's what you mean. That usually happens over a 20 or 25 year period. Just usually, unless you have an angel donor who's multimillionaire and says, we want to start with something really big right away. And even then, I'm not sure that's an ideal situation. So I think it's better to grow organically, and then eventually there'll be the time to build the cathedral. And there should be some cathedrals in time. But even cathedrals were fairly far and few between. They were center places. So there may be some schools that become cathedral-like. And I mean that in a significant way. Beautiful buildings, very expensive in terms of funding it. They can become kind of hubs for a lot of home schools, a lot of small schools, cottage schools. But of course, what's most important is what's happening to the student. And so I think the physical attributes have a place because beauty teaches. We become what we behold. So I think it's really important. But it's also very easily to be derailed by an over-focus on the physical.
We're going down the line.
Not if I can help it, but you can go next.
I would first say lots and lots of books. It breaks my heart to hear about schools that are getting rid of their libraries and replacing them with computer labs and, I guess, digital books. Because of the population I work with as a nurse, my other top thing would be a space big enough for not only the kids but their parents to be welcome in the same place and to learn together. So that would be my physical attribute that I would aspire to.
If I'm dreaming, my ideal would be look a lot like a cloister or monastery, keeping the hours and tending gardens and complete learning community. But that's the kind of that's the dream version. The realistic version is to incorporate as many of those types of things within the context and the opportunities and the physical place where we are. But as Chris said too, I mean, to make things beautiful. as you can to do things well, and doesn't necessarily need to cost more, but just that sense of intentionality.
There's not much I can add to what's been shared, but I'll give an example of what I did when I was in a private school. My building was a portable building, and so how do I make it beautiful? I made the walls pretty sparse, so that wasn't the focus. A couple of beautiful pieces of artwork, but then I had curtains added to the window, and live plants brought into the classroom, and lamps. So that I could turn off the fluorescent lighting and just turn on the lamps for conversation. And I had coffee, tea, hot water, snacks in the classroom at all times and available. And so there was food provided. So it's making it like a home.
Now that there's a book called Making School Beautiful by John Skillen, who reflects on the medieval and Renaissance tradition of creating beautiful structures. And he's a Renaissance and medieval specialist. So he came into the classical tradition, learned about it, is very supportive of it. And so he did a little research as to what beautiful schools could and should be, very much along the lines that you've shared, especially the monastic approach. Our universities with the quad in the center, that is so lovely, that's the remnants of the cloister. That's why, I mean, Oxford, all of the Oxford colleges once were monasteries. That's why they have those beautiful green cloistered areas. So just think of the architecture of that. The buildings are looking in at a garden, right? So there's this focus of cultivation, a cultivated garden, and sunlight coming through the outside, through the entire room. So the whole room is filled with light. So you look inside of the cloister for contemplation, short breezeways and short little walls to sit on, to walk. You can walk and talk, peripatetic learning can occur. And then the other windows look outside to the community that you serve. It's just a lovely architecture.
I have a question for the audience. Can all of you hear okay? Okay, good. Just a quick thought I've got, although I'm trying not to, I'm moderating, but I think it needs to be humane, that it needs to correspond to the human body, to the needs of the human body, and to the human spirit. And if it does that, everything else will follow from it. Really, it does come down to what do you believe the child attending the school is, then build a building for that. Are we fighting a losing battle? Greg, are you? It's a trick question, I bet you.
I hesitate to bring up a quote because I butcher quotes all the time. I just completely. Chesterton says something along the lines of, and please help me, the idea that Christianity is always perpetually perpetually losing but never defeated type of. Someone help me. It's something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yes. And so from that standpoint, yes, it is a constant losing battle, but we're never defeated, and we do know the end. And we don't give up. I mean, it's that the cultivation aspect of there will always be weeds in your garden, so you have to perpetually pull them up. The work is never done, and so it's that ongoing ever vigilance of if you hesitate or wait or leave a few weeks off. We've been gone for 2.5 weeks. I'm scared to see what my yard looks like. I'd have no idea. But just in 2.5 weeks, it's going to be a jungle, or potentially. Monsters may have come. Yes, exactly. So it's that constant vigilance to do that. But I had a point in that too. Well, anyway, you have to continue to tend that. And then that allows things to grow, and the beauty of that. But it's ongoing. I know the point of that too. The work is never done, which is why the Lord gives us the Sabbath. You don't rest because your work is done. You rest because the Lord gives you that as a gift. And so to take that too, because in the midst of what is losing or feels like losing, you need restoration. You need the rest for your soul. You need the gift of the Lord's Day. and the gift of the body of Christ, so that then you are prepared to go out again to the work that He's called you to?
I think this is a really important question to me right now. Are we fighting a losing battle? It is a trick question. It's almost like, have you stopped cheating on your income taxes yet? Or abusing your kids? Because you can't say yes or no. It's both, or it's the wrong question. Because here's what Tozer said: the history of Christianity is an unbroken series of victories disguised as crucifixions. That there's death and dying and cross-bearing as the call of the Christian life, and ongoing suffering. And this also relates very much to what you believe the scriptures teach about our end, because it teaches both that there's going to be victory and crucifixion. That it's in giving that we receive, it's in dying that we live. And we know and there's also a kind of prudence that comes from studying the history of our faith. But your eschatology matters. So if you follow Augustine, you'll think one way about what's going to happen. If you follow Rushdoony, you'll think a different way. In other words, if you're an ardent post-millennialist who believes that we're going to win in every respect possible, politically, etc., then you're going to expect that we're going to defeat all of our enemies, and you're going to be inclined to use warfare metaphors as your primary metaphors. We are engaged in warfare. It's spiritual warfare, but we also lay down our life for our friends, and we also bind up the Samaritan when he's wounded, or we become this. We go to the Samaritan at the well. We serve, we live, we die, and we're willing to be martyred. And demographics also matter. If we were living in Saudi Arabia right now, our discussion about the great victory we're expecting would be a little different than living as Americans in the 21st century. It's difficult because we look back to a time when there was a large Christian consensus, and many of us feel betrayed, and we want to get it back. But if in God's providence we are no longer the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where 98% of us were all Christians, we can't expect everyone else to act like Christians. And so Benedict said this: we're no longer in America in the age of Christendom. Age of Christendom is when the church had really been established and a great Christian consensus was created. We're going back to the apostolic age, when we are like the apostles, spreading the faith again, and when there may be a time where we're going to suffer, and that's the way we will win. Is they will look at us as we're suffering and say, look how they loved one another. That may be what we have. So I'm Augustinian. I think the wheat and the tares are going to grow together. I think the best book to read right now in light of our political situation is Augustine's City of God. City of God and City of Man is primarily described how Christians have thought about our role in culture for about 1,800 years, until post-millennialism about a century ago began to rise as another way of thinking about how Christians will be in the world. Postmillennialism is a view that believes that we will be increasingly victorious around the globe, Jesus Lord over everything, every area of life, until then after that Christ will return. A realized amillennialism, which is Augustinianism, believes that the wheat and the tares will grow up together, and that there will always be a paradoxical relationship with our non-Christian neighbors. And there'll be times when it seems that we're in the majority, and then we serve, and the laws we pass will reflect a Christian majority, but there'll be times when we're not there, and we will have to, as Augustine says, we will be a blessing to you no matter what. Christians in any situation, even in Saudi Arabia, will be great citizens for any government, whether it's communist, socialist, liberal democracy, etc. Just kind of make one more comment. I know I'm going on for a while. Liberal democracy, the kind of democracy we're in right now, is a novelty in history. It's only been around since about the 1700s. So, Locke and others. Whatever happened to the monarchy? So we tend to think that the liberal democracy is the only form of government that seems to be rational and meaningful, but there have been many others throughout history, and there may be others that will come. So I think City of God tells us that we're going to have to live together and be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. And it's going to be complex. And it may look like a defeat at times, it may look like victory, but we ought not to expect either to be squashed and killed or to reign over the earth. I would enjoy feedback on that. Because I think we probably come from a variety of different eschatologies and political dispositions. It's difficult. And with the craziness that's happening in our culture, you're going to be tempted to either give up in despair or to be mad and fight. But what is the Christ-like response to the turmoil of our culture? But back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Do either of you want to comment on that?
Well, you caught my attention on the last question. How are we going to respond? How do we live today? And so I live with hope. I live in the world, and I am the light and the salt in the community that I'm in. And I do the work that He's given me to do today. And I keep going forward, knowing that in the end, I serve the Most High God, not just one. And I know He will be victorious.
What about political activism? What about trying to change laws and such so that there's more freedom to do what we want to do, or so that they reflect biblical teaching and morality? We see laws being passed today that are very disturbing in what they allow. Shouldn't some Christians be involved in trying to change that and fight against it, or should we withdraw and be quiet and just be ready to let the culture go where it's going to go? The Christians seem to be wrestling with that. Some might just retreat, some might fight. Maybe there's roles that some of us are called to, and other roles that we're not.
That's where I land.
Mm-hmm.
That there's roles we're called to, right? There is one who does the calling, and then we have to live it out and respond. Mm-hmm. And so then, am I called to either be the one to step out into that political realm? Am I called to support the one? And so that's where it's the daily walking with the Lord, and asking Him, where do you have me? What is the work of my hands? Where is my mouth to speak? What are the words that they be from you and not from me? I think it's individual.
I love that. So I want to use it to go on to the next question, but I want this next question to be considered in light of the last question. And it's for you, Nina. The question is, how does your classical background inform your role? Which is to say, what they wrote was inform your nursing practice. Have you seen it impact your patients? And the reason I'm connecting it is because I would contend that that's your domain of spiritual warfare right there as a professional. I'd be very interested to know, how does your background in the classical tradition inform and benefit your patients? Inform your role and benefit your patients?
It's been a blessing to have my nursing practice merge with my classical training over the past few years. I've been a nurse for 20 years, and I always wanted to teach, even in high school. I was actually granted a scholarship for teaching. In exchange for tuition, I would commit to teaching. And I remember I didn't want to sign the contract because there was something in me that knew that that's not the kind of teaching that I wanted to be obliged to. And so I went to undergrad and majored in anthropology and then went on to nursing school. I currently work with homeless women and children, and there's always been this desire to work with underserved populations. But my learning in the classical movement has helped me to see even more clearly the humanity in my patients and their need for healing beyond what I do in that office. And so there's this discord within me a lot of times because I can't take their hand and, hey, let's go read this book, and let's go do this thing that will humanize you beyond this prescription or beyond this test. And so, when I did my dissertation, I focused on trauma and the relationship between childhood trauma and health choices later in life. And later in life, meaning these were women suffering through unimaginable things throughout their childhood. And at ages 11, 12, were already getting into some very destructive choices that they were pulled into. And one of the conclusions I drew was that we needed to educate them, these young ladies, sooner than ages 10, 11, 12. When I made that conclusion, it wasn't about educating the soul, it was health education and empowerment and how to have good self-esteem. And it's all coming full circle now because I realize that type of education is very limited even. It's good, so the Lord is really starting to unfold things that I did years ago and how it's coming full circle, and that education is much deeper than what I thought in that conclusion that I wrote 11 years ago. So.
I'd love any of you to respond to the question of spiritual warfare in relation to your role and the impact of the Christian classical tradition on your role. Nina, I love that you were able to answer it from the nursing perspective, because if classical education is training to get more education, it doesn't interest me. But if it's about being human, then it's everywhere. It applies everywhere. So thank you for illustrating that. Andrea, you've talked about it, how it's helped you as a mother. Greg, you're a musician. Maybe that's not fair, too easy, but how has it affected you as a musician? Chris, you were moaning the fact that you're a CEO. Bemoaning, how has it affected you as a CEO? And any of you, I'd love to hear about 3 seconds worth of an answer to that.
I appreciate this question about spiritual warfare. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. And so I think one of the great deceptions of the devil is to distract us from that fact. We don't think about the devil anymore. We don't do spiritual warfare. We just bracket it off. But the demonic realm is real, and you again cite Augustine. You read Augustine, and he says the pagan gods are all demons. The early Christians would have exorcisms and cleanse the old pagan temples and turn them into churches. So where's the kind of spiritual cleansing that needs to occur? What with our own temples, our own homeschools, our own schools, our own bodies? And I would think that one of the great places of spiritual warfare is distraction, pulling us away with disordered loves for things that take us away from the kingdom of God. And just do a survey in your own heart. What is that thing that keeps pulling you away? Why are you looking at your phone right now? I'm just joking. Some of you are looking up a scripture verse, right? But I'm terribly distracted by going anywhere with my device. I'm not present. I'm not present sometimes with my wife. I'm not present in church. I'm not present with my children. I'm not present with people I work with because I'm just distracted. And that's a spiritual battle, such that I think maybe the biggest challenge that's keeping your kids from loving God is the fact that you gave them a smartphone when they were 14, and they can't handle it. You can't handle your own. It controls you. You're honest about it. Read Jonathan Haidt's most recent article in the Atlantic Monthly. He gave a testimony before Congress about this. He's a psychologist who studied this over and over again. He's come to the conclusion that teenagers ought not to be driving when they're 15, and students shouldn't be given a phone when they're 15. He thinks it needs to be 18 or 19. You can't handle it. Your brain cannot compete with what that screen is doing to you. So you can't meditate, you can't contemplate, you can't pray, you can't read a long book, you can't sustain a long conversation. You're constantly interrupting yourself. And we just ignore it as it's not an issue. We just 97% of us have a smartphone. And the psychology, the research shows that if it's on your body, you're not paying as much attention. If it's in your backpack on the floor, your attention has been diminished. If it's in the locker across the hall, your attention is still being affected. If it's downstairs in a basket and locked up, that's helpful. But it's best if it's just not in your room, it's not at home. I don't think we should be giving smartphones to our kids till, I think Haidt is right. You should read this. So I'll get off the soapbox here, but I'm preaching to myself. I've got mine right here, and I love it. And I hate it.
I recommend giving them to people at retirement.
At retirement. Maybe we should have given one to Greg as a gift. That would have been helpful. Don't think he has one. That's why he's so virtuous. No, it's right there. Okay. Do any of you not have a smartphone? Raise your hand if you're one of those people. Okay, there's 3 in the audience. Okay, so 4 or 5.
Those of you that don't have one, did you lose it? It has a finder in it, you know.
Those of you who were here last year at the CiRCE conference, you might remember we asked for prayer for Carolyn Weber trying to get across the Canadian border to actually come to New College to be able to teach this past year. It's one of the reasons why I wanted her here this year. It's an answer to prayer to have her here. But one of the things through that whole experience, and it's a harrowing experience in all sorts of ways, and it's still in some ways ongoing, just a greater awareness, and this is, we're stupid and forgetful people, a greater awareness of the spiritual dimension and opposition that is continually against us. And the need to be reminded again and again to be aware of it, to pray against it, and to do so with others. And I think that was made aware again a few months ago, just realizing that some very close relationships had gotten a little sideways and not sure why. And just the recognition of we can't allow there to be any division, any unresolved issues. It's too hard, it's too difficult. Plus, as brothers and sisters in Christ, we can't. There is no option for unforgiveness if you are in Christ. Period. I mean, that's the parable of the unforgiving servant, right? There is no option for that. And so what does that mean to think about things more in the spiritual mindset of the warfare aspect of that, of praying for that, against that, and realizing that issue as being prevalent and consistent with what we're doing. I mean, because we are doing significant work, of course there's going to be opposition. Now, some of the opposition is because we do stupid things. We make bad decisions. That's not spiritual warfare. That's just, lack of judgment. That's okay. There's grace for that too. But to be aware of the spiritual dimension and to not dismiss that.
Well, I'll just read a quotation from this book, Nihilism, The Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age by Eugene Rose. Father Seraphim Rose, he wrote this in 1962, I think it was. And this is what he said. Our age, the first in Christian times to disbelieve entirely in hell, itself more thoroughly than any other embodies the spirit of hell. Well, it does increase the challenge. Great. What do we do when poetic truth and empirical truth conflict? An example given is the old cosmology of the planets. What do we do when poetic truth and empirical truth conflict?
They don't conflict. The natural world and intuitive knowing are in harmony, and so if there is some lack of harmony, it's a problem with our perception. the way we think about empirical truths or models of nature is always evolving and changing. So we try to approximate with our models what we think reality is. The reality itself is in perfect harmony with intuitive knowing, poetic truth, intuition, you might say, with our experiential knowledge. Our experiential knowledge is always incomplete. There's always another observation to make. There's always tomorrow. And so theories of modeling the world or nature change and evolve. And we might think that we're getting closer, but what do we know of all things that we can know about the natural world? What percentage of the known is there compared to the unknown? Your scientists will tell you we know a very, 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 very small amount. So there's always this big realm of mystery. So why should we expect that? Why should we let the empirical models be too directive of what we think the world really is? Theories are changing right now as people are looking at that cosmic cliff and the star nurseries. Really smart astronomers are trying to rethink how we can accommodate all of what we're seeing into a theory. What would you say, Greg?
Yeah, I would agree that they don't conflict. And just as a quick example of that, I believe that the Earth is the center of our solar system. Because does the Earth serve the sun or does the sun serve the Earth? Now, empirically, yes, the Earth goes around the sun. But from the theological and philosophical position, it is the sun that brings the light to the Earth at the precise distance that allows us not to freeze or burn up. It is the other planets, because of their gravitational pull, that keep us in the orbit so that we don't get too far or too close. It's the larger planets, the shepherd planets, that keep all the asteroids from banging into the Earth and destroying us with asteroids and such. It is those other aspects of the solar system that serve the opportunity for God's image bearers to live in this world that He has created. And so from that perspective, yes, the Earth is the center. Empirically, it revolves around the sun. And both of those things are true. And that gets to the heart of the question of the aspects of truth, versus fact, right? The fact of that is different than the truth of that. And the truth is a much deeper, richer, beautiful, contemplative thing.
I was just going to thank you for giving us the time to contemplate the new images. It actually made me tearful because it was a reflection of what you just said, but also a reminder to me of how much I don't know that God knows. In my own story, in my kids' stories, and it reminded me to just trust. And it made me realize I need to be more willing to say I don't know. Because it could be my perception that's not perceiving, not that it's not there or that it doesn't exist. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Christopher, I stopped you. I did it on purpose.
No,
Greg?
you're smart to do that. Do facts speak for themselves? Some people think that they do, that the scientists just find a new fact, make a new observation, and it just speaks, and then now we know it's done. But facts don't speak for themselves. They're always interpreted. And we're always looking at an object of our perception, and that our perception is always limited. So sometimes that very object, like the sun or a star or the heavens, we see something new about it, and it changes. And you probably have seen this illustration before. You never see something wholly, do you? So if I hold up here's another device that's very distracting. I hold up this iPad. I've never seen the whole thing. I'm not seeing the back of it now. So I'm always only having to turn and see it and so forth. So there's always this limitation that we have as creatures trying to observe the creation that's probably infinite. So there's always, what we know is always provisional. In fact, one of my friends, a scientist, John May, says, science doesn't speak about what's true. The theories are never true or false. They're either weak or strong and always subject to some change and growth. So, so poetic knowledge, no, it's never going to be in conflict. There's another way of saying that the book of nature is not going to be in conflict with the book of Scripture. These two things will cohere, but our ability to understand all the ways in which they do cohere is very limited and ongoing. It makes it adventuresome.
So we're just about out of time. I want to give each of you 30 seconds to leave us with one application, if you want, a harmonizing thought, a summative something or other, just something that you'd like to, just to give us a gift.
Well, I'll re-gift what was given to me. With the earlier talk this morning, we got on the same idea of fact and truth. And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, so if we're a society who's been steeped in holding on to pursuing facts, let's also look at the society that, as Christians, the divorce rate, the depression rate is not all that different than those who don't follow Christ. And so might it be a time to embrace the tradition with humility of myth.
Thank you. Greg?
Listen to more music, particularly Bach and Renaissance polyphony.
Consider it done. Nina?
One thing I'm trying to do more intuitively in my teaching is to always question. In nursing, we have the first thing we do with patients is assess, and it should be what we do with our students. We don't always do that, and that's something I'm learning to do. But my 2 assessment questions for how I teach, I'm trying to make it more intuitive. I'm getting there. I have a long way to go. Is it helping my kids, my students, Lord, to love their God with their heart, mind, and soul? And is it helping them to love their neighbor as themselves? And if I can do a little bit of that, then I think I will do some good in their lives. So,
Thank you. Christopher?
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Find some time to be at wonder in the world, and find time for your children to be at wonder in the world. Long periods of time. Reading a book called The Ethics of Beauty, and one of the recommendations for people who've suffered trauma is to experience beauty. To experience beauty first as a way of coming to know what is true. When we come to know Christ as the truth, the way, the life, we encounter him first as the resurrected, glorious Christ. The apostles didn't understand the crucifixion until they had met the resurrected Christ. Christ comes to us first in beauty. He comes to us first as a beautiful, resurrected Savior, and then we understand the crucifixion. We wouldn't understand the crucifixion unless there was a resurrection. Give yourself some time to experience resurrection beauty. Long periods of time. Sometimes veterans come back from war. One of the best things they say now that you can do to get healed from PTSD is to go hike the Appalachian Trail for a month. People who go through cognitive talk therapy who come back from PTSD, they get worse. The suicide rate gets worse when you try to talk through the trauma. They need beauty and harmony and liturgy and communion. So resacralize your homeschool. Resacralize all that you do in education. Find the sacred in your life and contemplate the sacred like David did in Psalm 27. Maybe memorize Psalm 27 and get a telescope and spend 30 minutes a night or a week looking at the stars.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel.